Look, I love my Porsche Cayman. It's by far the best car I've ever owned. In fact, if my Cayman was the last car I ever owned, I could die satisfied. However, as good as it is, it's not the best car I've ever driven. In this video, I'm going to list all the cars that I've driven that I would trade my Porsche Cayman in for if there was no change in cost to me. I've driven a lot of different stuff. Mustangs, Miatas, Raptors, $100,000 luxury SUVs, and even a solar-powered race car. But the total number of cars on this list, 3. Just 3. And that is more of a testament to how good the Cayman is than anything. Since it wouldn't be much of a video if I just told you about 3 different cars, I'll tell you the 2 cars that are just on the margin, but not quite good enough that I would trade my Cayman in for them. The first of these 2 cars is the Mustang GT with a manual transmission. On paper, this is a better car than my Cayman in almost every measurable way. I've done a couple reviews of Mustang GTs already, so I won't go too in-depth here. If you want to go see my reviews of previous Mustang GTs, I'll put links to those in the description. The reason the Mustang GT is just on the margins of being good enough for me to consider it as a good trade-in option, but not quite to the point where I would trade my Cayman in for one even if the price was the same and it didn't cost me anything more, it mostly comes down to the size. It's just a little too big for me. I know for a lot of people, being bigger than a Cayman would be a plus, but I really value the maneuverability of a small sports car. I'm also not a large person myself, and I don't have any kids, and nor do I plan on having any, so 2 seats is usually enough. That brings me to the other car that almost made my list, which is the 2017 Mazda Miata. Obviously, I'm partial to Miatas since that's the car I started my channel with. I drove a 2017 Miata last time I was car shopping, and it was awesome. It's actually very similar to the Cayman in a lot of ways. It's also more playful and carefree than the Cayman because it's a convertible. However, even with all that, the Miata is a noticeable downgrade in speed, acceleration, and refinement from my Porsche. Sure, it's probably the most refined and well-equipped new sports car at that price level, but it's definitely not a Porsche standard, even compared to a 2007 one like mine. I don't have any issues with the quality of the car really, it's more just there's some weird, awkward things like it doesn't have a real glove box, and the cup holder situation is somehow even worse in the Miata than it is in my Porsche. Plus, it's a lot less practical even though the size of the car is pretty similar to the Cayman. The trunk is tiny and it doesn't have a front trunk, which is a huge advantage that the Cayman has that really no other car outside of a Porsche will. So without further ado, that brings me to the first car on my list, the Ferrari 360. This is a car that, if it didn't cost me any more money, I would trade my Cayman for it in an instant. I drove a Ferrari 360 at one of those pay us a lot of money to drive a supercar with an instructor around a course places. Of course, that means the one that I drove was totally beat to shit. The instructor kept telling me to slow down, and they wanted to charge me another $25 to get the video of me driving. I didn't pay for it. However, the drive itself was glorious. I really can't compare to anything else that I've driven. I've wanted a Ferrari ever since I was a kid, and I was worried that it would be one of those don't meet your heroes kind of things, but it totally wasn't. It was everything I hoped it could be. The next car on my list is the 1999 Porsche 911 Carrera that I drove back in 2015. I have a soft spot for this car because it was the first Porsche that I've ever driven, and it made me go from being a Porsche skeptic to a Porsche fanboy in about 2 hours. I never quite understood why people were so passionate about Porsches, because I always thought they looked a bit too plain and a bit understated to be an exciting car. And my first experience was in the 996, which is supposed to be the worst of all 911s too. But as soon as I started driving it, I was like, oh, that's why people like Porsches. The 911 is a sports car on another level compared to other sports cars. There's just something about it that is so precise and feels so good driving that no other car that I've driven has really even come close to matching. The Ferrari probably comes the closest, but it's such a different driving experience that it's almost like comparing apples to oranges. The only reason I'd trade my Cayman for a 996 911 though is for the speed and the sound. They're both extremely addicting. I firmly believe the Cayman is a much better looking car. The 1999 911 that I drove had a little bit of a plasticky kind of look on the inside. It's not quite to a fully modern standard yet, whereas my 2007 Cayman is not that far off from a modern car in terms of interior quality. But that sound and that speed from the 911 Flat 6 is, oh my gosh, it is to die for. Plus, every now and then, it would be nice to have those little rear seats. If I got a 996, it would have to be in good shape, and it would have to have the IMS bearing issue taken care of, though, because I don't want to have to deal with an exploding engine. The last car on my list is a car that I literally have dreams about. It's the 1980 Porsche 911 Turbo that I drove later in that same summer in 2015. My God. I get butterflies just when I see one now. It's the most raw, pure, exciting driving experience I've ever had. It's not an easy car to drive. The transmission requires finesse. The pedals are oddly placed. It makes you work for it a bit. But when you get those turbos spooled up and the boost kicks in, it's like the car has a second engine that just switches on at full throttle. It's probably good for my safety that I can't actually afford to trade my Cayman in for one, because that boost is so addicting, I might get myself into some hairy situations. Not only is it fast as hell, but it's light too. It'll take a corner like it's on rails, which I know is a cliche, but in fact, driving the 911 is the first time I've ever understood what they meant by the quote, driving like it's on rails phrase. The steering is direct, it's tossable, until it isn't, or so I'm told. Not a lot of people seem to survive when they get to the point where it's no longer tossable. Anyways, that 1980 911 Turbo is probably still the best car I've ever driven. It even has 2 rear seats. Maybe if the Ferrari 360 I'd driven had a manual, I'd be saying it was better, but the one that I drove was unfortunately a flappy pedal, so for now the 911 Turbo with the manual transmission edges it out. Now all that being said, I have absolutely no plans to trade my Cayman in for anything these days. I love it just the way it is. I just want to keep driving it. And I'm lucky that in my day job career, I'm actually getting to a point where I'm almost able to spend a lot more time with my car than I was before. So what do you guys think? Is there a car that you've driven that you know you'd trade your own car for? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you guys next time, and thanks for watching.